Good evening and welcome to the Archaeology of Connecticut. I'm State Archaeologist Sarah Sportman and I'm here with my co-host Scott Brady of the Friends of the Office of State Archaeology. For our first show of 2023, we decided to focus on the wildly popular and controversial Netflix show Ancient Apocalypse. The show is the brainchild of Graham Hancock, an English journalist who's published numerous popular books promoting pseudoscientific theories about ancient civilizations, aliens, and lost artifacts like the Ark of the Covenant. Ancient Apocalypse ties most closely with his 1995 book, Fingerprints of the Gods. Both the book and the show argue that a highly advanced society existed on Earth during the last ice age, but was destroyed by a catastrophic event. Before the civilization fell, Hancock contends that it sent out emissaries to pass on its advanced knowledge and technology to simpler peoples around the world. If you've been following the show and some of the coverage of it, you probably already know it's been broadly criticized by the archaeological community for a variety of reasons that we'll get into this evening. So tonight, to talk about the show, we're joined by two Connecticut archaeologists who have both publicly waded into the debate over Ancient Apocalypse. First, on the phone, we have Dr. Ken Fader, Emeritus Professor of Anthropology at Central Connecticut State University, who has spent a large part of his career writing, speaking, and teaching about science and pseudoscience and archaeology. Kenny, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here, Sarah.
And we also have Dr. Bill Farley, Associate Professor of Anthropology at Southern Connecticut State University. You might remember Bill from his episode on video game archaeology last fall. And he has also waded into this debate with some kind of spectacular results on his YouTube channel. So Bill and Kenny, we're thrilled to have you both on the show tonight, and I hope that we can have a lively discussion of this really interesting and timely topic.
Yeah. I think Bill and I are going to cause a lot of trouble, Sarah, so I don't know, we may have some issues, but if anybody if you have complaints about Bill or me, be sure to let Sarah know. Don't talk to us. We don't want to hear you.
We're off and running.
Yep.
Yep, I agree. I'll just, her email will be in the show notes, and...
Hi, Kenny. This is Scott. I just wanted to kind of get us started with, for those that aren't familiar with this particular show, can you kind of talk about the history of pseudoscience, especially as it relates to archaeology, and how we got to this point that shows like this and others on what I hoped would have been respectable channels have become really, really outrageously not based in any kind of science? Well,
I mean, I think we all would be naive enough. We used to be naive enough to believe that shows that Netflix and the History Channel and even National Geographic were all about educating people in an entertaining way. We know that's not true. It's all about money. It's all about clicks. It's all about how many people can we get in the audience, and that's fair enough. The deal with Graham Hancock that I think a lot of people don't get is that this guy didn't just spring out of Zeus's head. This is not some new thing. He's been doing this for at least 3 decades. Fingerprints of the Gods was published in 1995, and it's same song. The lyrics have changed a little bit, but it's the same argument. Again, as Sarah explained it, that there was a spectacularly advanced civilization that dates back to at least twice as old as the civilizations that standard archaeology acknowledges: Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Peru before the Inca, the Mesoamerican societies. And so, but that this is twice as old, and it was in fact the mother culture, the source of everything. And Hancock, what Hancock is saying is that there's nothing new to it, and in fact, finally and at last, he acknowledges the A word. I used to make fun of to my students about Graham Hancock never wanting to say the A word, and the A word is Atlantis. And so you go through Fingerprints of the Gods, and you're really hard-pressed to find him actually naming this super civilization as Atlantis. Now, these days, he's kind of grudgingly says, okay, call it Atlantis, call it whatever, but it really harks back to the 19th century, the Victorian age, when Ignatius Donnelly, an American congressman and failed vice presidential aspirant, there are political connections here, wrote his book, Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, in which fundamentally he takes literally the stories that Plato told in a couple of his dialogues and says, nope, Atlantis was a real place, it was highly advanced, it was at his time, 9,000 years ago, so meaning 11,000 years ago our time, and that it was incredibly important in the history of the world. They also were the bad guys. They were the evil guys, and a lot of people, again, ignore that fact. But they were the bad guys in this allegory. But the great civilizations, Plato doesn't say that they are the source of all civilization, but that's what Ignatius Darnley says, that Atlantis was real. Atlantis was the mother culture, and he maps the world, and check mark after check mark after check mark, ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, even the mound builders in North America, the cultures of the complex cultures of South America, that all of them were inspired by Atlantis. And we could talk about why Darnley said that, but Graham Hancock has really bought into that. He has, again, for 30 years, embraced that notion, and with each book, it's a different reason why that great civilization disappeared. Now, in Ancient Apocalypse, it's the Younger Dryas impact. This notion that is still very controversial, and it certainly has not been definitively proven, that something on the order of 12,000 years ago, a comet or some other celestial body, smashed into the earth, wreaking havoc, destroying this great civilization, and that what we see in the archaeological record is just a tepid or pale reflection of the cultures that were inspired by Atlantis, or whatever the hell it is you want to call it. But the problem is, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, more, is that there is exactly zero evidence for the existence of such a place.
Yeah, it's just building on what Kenny's been saying. I think this is where the challenge comes in for archaeologists. What role do archaeologists play in this whole story? Is archaeologists work in the realm of evidence, right? So we are scientists and physical scientists, social scientists. No matter how we frame it, we have to work from a place of hypothesis and hypothesis testing. And the idea that there's an advanced civilization in the Pleistocene, in the last ice age, that inspired all the others, that is a perfectly valid hypothesis that Graham has laid out there for us. But he would like us all to accept that hypothesis without any evidence whatsoever. And this is where we get kind of incredulous, is the idea that there's this massive globe-spanning civilization that went on to inspire all these other civilizations, and yet there's no evidence for it at all. We have archaeological evidence of many cultures in the Pleistocene all over the world. People were living and living out their lives as hunter-gatherers, and then later developing agriculture and horticulture and all of these other aspects of culture. And we have evidence for those. We can follow them through time in different places in the world. So it's not like this meteor or whatever wiped out everything on the planet. It just wiped out evidence of Atlantis. That's it. So we can't.
It was selective.
Yeah, it was a very selective meteor strike. So that's the idea, right? And here's where things get a little bit weirder, I think. I'll say and more than or, because I think Hancock presents this as an and, that it's all a great conspiracy, that archaeologists secretly actually know about all this evidence, and we are hiding it because our careers depend on us not revealing that we have evidence of a massive culture that nobody knows about. I hope you're following along with why that doesn't make any sense. Any archaeologist who had evidence of something like this would immediately be screaming it to the rooftops because it would make our career 1,000 times over. And we've been told a lot, well, you're defending your grant funding, so you're hiding evidence of this. All right, do you know how much do you know how much money the national parks, the National Science Foundation and Wenner-Gren would pour on me with a dump truck if I had evidence of a 15,000-year-old mega civilization spanning the entire globe? I would be drowning in money. Maybe that's what I'm supposed to be protecting myself from, is suffocation by cash. I don't know.
Dude, they would offer you a Netflix series.
Yeah.
Now, I'll be devil's advocate, right? Graham says he does have evidence because every culture built pyramids, and every culture has a flood story and a number of other mythological similarities. So what do you mainstream archaeologists have to say to that?
The best answer I have for that is everything he says, all of that argument, is exactly the argument that Ignatius Darnley made in 1882. It's exactly the same, where Darnley literally, point by point, hey, there are pyramids on either side of the Atlantic. There must be a common source. They have agriculture on either side of the Atlantic. There must be a common source. There's writing on either side of the Atlantic. There must be a common source. But this is an argument from essential ignorance. And here's the rule from now on. We are not allowed to call the monumental structures in Mesoamerica pyramids. Can't do it anymore. I disallow that. I will flunk you on the exam if you call them pyramids. Why? Because the pyramids in Egypt are geometric pyramids, four triangular faces that meet at a common apex. That's not what the pyramids of Mesoamerica. Oh, damn! I did it. I broke my own rule.
You failed,
no.
Ken. Sorry.
That's what the structures in Mesoamerica, they don't look like that. They're not the same raw material. They're not built the same way. The architecture is different. They don't look the same. They are... this is like, you guys remember the Monty Python routine about the person describing her hypothesis about the Brontosaurus? Yes. They're thin at one end, thick again in the middle, and then thin again at the other end. Well, that describes all dinosaurs, I guess. Well, so these pyramids on either side of the Atlantic, well, yeah, they're small on the top and they're a lot bigger on the bottom. That doesn't make them the same thing. Agriculture is another example. These Atlanteans, or whoever they were, had this great sense of humor because they gave everybody in the world different crops. They gave everybody in the world... How come you're giving the folks in Mesoamerica corn, beans, and squash, but you're giving the folks in the Southwest Asia wheat and oats and barley? Why is that? That doesn't make any sense. The languages, yes, there are written languages on either side of the Atlantic. They are completely not if you know Egyptian hieroglyphs, you don't know Maya hieroglyphs. You can't they're not interchangeable. My dad, when he retired, he actually taught himself Egyptian hieroglyphs. So I got him a book on Maya hieroglyphs. And I say, knowing the rules of Egyptian writing and reading, does that help you at all with this Mayan stuff? And he looked at me like I was from another planet. He says, absolutely not. So again, how could if everything is inspired by this one common mother culture, how come none of these things really are alike when you look at them with any kind of detail?
Yeah, I've always, the word I have for this kind of evidence is this looks like that evidence, which is, oh, this kind of looks like that, so they must be related. I mean, the technical term for that is equifinal evidence, right? So where we've got two things that look similar, but we can build out the chain of operations that led to them from two different directions. So, yeah, the pyramids, I'm going to use the term pyramids, even though Kenny said we're not allowed to do that anymore. But, right, these pyramids in different places.
Every time you say that word,
we can track the history of pyramid building, for instance, in Egypt, back through time, right? The Great Pyramids of Giza did not emerge from nowhere. There is a cultural history and a material history behind those where we can see step pyramids that came before those and mastabas, sort of these one-level pyramids that, they're not pyramids obviously at that point, but one level of a pyramid sort of before that. You can track that change through time, and it doesn't follow the same trajectory we might see in another part of the world. So it's just archaeology already provides us the tool to test these questions. The other challenge of this is, and I think this is a big one, is there's an issue of time dilation here. So Hancock in the show and a lot of his supporters don't have a good grasp on how long like 5,000 years is. Like, they don't have a grasp on the fact that that is a tremendously, unimaginably long amount of time. So this idea that, well, the great sages of Atlantis, 10,000 years after the destruction of their civilization, were in Egypt teaching people how to do agriculture. Do you know how many generations of people that is? So this is and this isn't even a knock. I think learning to understand and recognize time depth is a learned skill, and it's one that archaeologists spend a lot of time learning. I think historians do too. Anybody can learn it. You don't need to have a PhD in this stuff to get comfortable with this idea. But it's really easy to forget how long these stretches of time are separating sometimes civilizations that are totally unrelated. In space, it's easy to think this is on this side of the Atlantic and this one's on the other side of the Atlantic. But also in time that 4, 5, 6,000 year span of time between two different civilizations is also an unimpeachably large distance, and in many ways even more so, right? So these are just, I think, some of the logical trappings that are inside this show that we can pretty easily poke some holes in.
Yeah, for those of you out there that do genealogy at all, right? Most of us have come to accept that 100 years is 4 or 5 generations.
Right, yeah.
So you do the math, 5,000 years at 4 or 5 generations. That's a lot of time to pass down really complicated information where the society that provides that information doesn't exist any longer.
Yeah. Let me just talk a little bit about the concept of generational change. What Bill said was extremely, extremely, extremely important. And I have to just very, very briefly read a statement from Graham Hancock, right? The archaeological evidence suggested that rather than developing slowly and painfully, as is normal with human societies, the civilization of ancient Egypt, like that of the Olmecs, emerged all at once and fully formed. Now, here's the deal. That's absolutely not true. And in 1995, when he wrote that, we know it's not true. And I know that Hancock's followers get really pissed when we compare Hancock to von Däniken, but here's a quote from von Däniken. If we meekly accept the neat package of knowledge that Egyptologists serve up to us, ancient Egypt appears suddenly and without transition and a fantastic ready-made civilization. It's exactly the same argument. And it's exactly what Bill was talking about. The Egyptian pyramids were perfected over the course of 5 generations, at least 100 years before the first halting steps in building a pyramid to the Pyramid of Khufu.
Yeah.
Now, if von Däniken or Hancock were correct that those things appeared overnight, then we have a really interesting thing to discuss, which is, well, where the hell did that come from? Because those things don't just appear. They occur over the course of generations as people trial and error. People make mistakes, and then they fix those mistakes, and they tweak the technology. But if that didn't happen, yeah, they'd have a point. But that's absolutely and fundamentally not true. These things occurred over generations as people perfected those technologies, and that's what human beings do. That's the standard thing in human development. Now we can agree that there are times when technologies do show up. Well, look at ceramics in Connecticut. Ceramics in Connecticut kind of show up 3,000 years ago, and they moved in from outside. So diffusion, the movement of ideas, that certainly happens. But the archaeological evidence for what Hancock is talking about, and von Däniken, and Ignatius Donnelly, it simply is wrong. Now, Donnelly was talking in 1882, so maybe, we can cut him some slack. But today, now, 2023, no, there's really no explanation or excuse for that kind of argument.
Yeah, and I think another real big problem with this is that a lot of what Hancock is saying is really taking away a lot of, humanity's ingenuity, I think, in a lot of his arguments. The idea that people weren't capable of doing these things. I mean, if you think about it, going back to the generational issue and also the technology issue, right? Like, my great-grandmother didn't even have a phone in her house until she was well into adulthood, right? I have a phone in my pocket that I carry around that functions as a personal computer. This all happened within 3 generations? I mean, based on human ingenuity, and it's technology building, right? People, discoveries, new innovations, and then we build on them through time, and it can happen really fast.
I think this is a real huge issue with the show too. That I agree with you, Sarah. And there's an irony to this because we've gotten the sort of archaeological skeptics of the show have gotten accused a lot of not respecting ancient peoples, that we don't respect that they could do amazing things. And I actually think the opposite is true. Hancock says in the show, and I'm paraphrasing, that as opposed to quoting because I don't have the quote right in front of me, but that hunter-gatherer people at the beginning of the Holocene, the end of the Pleistocene, 12,000, 13,000 years ago, well, they couldn't possibly have created, for instance, the site of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, which is one of the sites that's very focused on in the show, and maybe a site you haven't heard of before. You should Google it. It's really an incredible place, one of the most important archaeological sites in the world. And Hancock Hancock straight out says people they couldn't have done this. They could not have made this without help. They needed to have outside help from these ancient sages, these Atlantean sages, and it's just not true. Humans living 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago were exactly as smart, intelligent, creative as we are today. The only thing we have over them is generations of additional knowledge to build on. We're standing on their shoulders in many ways. So it's offensive to say that, I think. And so there's, we need to recognize that creativity was there, and sometimes that creativity appears in remarkable expressions, like some of these incredible archaeological sites that Hancock talks about on the show.
Yeah. The thing that bothers me, too, is that you'll hear, especially some of his followers, who say, yeah, how about Göbekli Tepe? You guys ignore that. Göbekli Tepe, a photograph of Göbekli Tepe is on the cover of the most recent edition of my prehistory text, and there are several pages in there about Göbekli Tepe. A lot of this, too, is a misapprehension of how science proceeds. So you guys were wrong about Göbekli Tepe. Yeah, absolutely. Archaeologists, we're skeptics. Scientists are supposed to be skeptical. So when Klaus Schmidt first announced that he had found this site and that it is pre-agricultural, but it has monumental architecture, yeah, absolutely, archaeologists were skeptical. It didn't fit the paradigm. Wow, that's really interesting. We weren't cynical about it. We didn't gainsay it automatically. Oh, impossible. What we said was, prove it. And guess what? Over the next few years, the people working at that site absolutely proved, yep, pre-agricultural, yep, they got incredibly sophisticated sculpture abilities at sculpting, and it's monumental. And you know what? The discipline catches up. We go, yeah, okay, that's totally cool. And the thing about Hancock's claim and Ignatius Donnelly's claim and von Daniken's claim, just as Bill said at the beginning, those are perfectly interesting hypotheses. But hypotheses don't get you very far if you don't have the affirmative, direct evidence to back them up. So, it's like I feel like with Hancock and with all the rest of these guys, I'll wait here. I'm not going to say absolutely you have to be wrong. It's no skin off of my nose if I'm wrong. In fact, that's the way science is supposed to work. But you need the evidence. There's two steps here. The first step is having an open mind, but the second step is understanding that until the evidence is forthcoming, we're not going to accept it.
Watching the show, for those of us who watched Seinfeld and remember Festivus, the airing of grievances.
Oh, yes.
That's kind of, that was Graham's kind of take the whole show. It was the airing of his personal grievance that he has this great idea and you guys won't go out and prove it for him. I don't understand how that becomes so fascinating to everyone else that becomes a reality. I mean, where are we that this now becomes what people want to believe is the truth? I guess it's connected to conspiracy theories, which we all kind of are interested in. And
yeah, I mean, I think that's an important aspect of this, right? Is why is this kind of show and these ideas, why are they so appealing to people? Why did they get so much traction? And why is this kind of grievance aspect of it it really is clearly a driving part of the narrative of this show, right? Because he has to set himself up as the heroic guy who's fighting against the archaeological establishment all through this show, because we're clearly very dangerous cabal of, and it's interesting that is the way that it's set up, and I think we should talk a little bit about that, like why that's the case.
I love cashing my monthly check from Big Archaeology. It really pays a lot of the bills.
This is very common. This is super typical. I don't think there's not a lot of difference between this and 20 years ago when people would say, hey, there's a guy in his garage. He has no degrees, but he's developed a perpetual motion machine that will enable us to power our homes, and it won't cost a penny. And he doesn't have any of those fancy degrees, and he thinks outside of the box. And I think that's really appealing to people who, when I tell them, well, for me to get a degree in archaeology, it was 4 years of undergraduate, it was 4 years of graduate school, it was writing a PhD dissertation, and that took like 5 or 6 more years. And it's like, wouldn't it be nice to think that some guy who's just a journalist has been able to outsmart us all, because if he could do it, well, so could I, because I don't want to go to school for 20 years, and I don't want to have to write a book. So I think there's that kind of almost populist theme here, where it's, hey, you guys are all a bunch of elites. You guys are all a bunch of know-it-alls, and you've gone to school for a real long time. But a guy like Graham Hancock, who, and the absurd thing there is the guy is extremely erudite. He's very well educated. He was actually a well-respected journalist. So to have him as the everyman who is knocking archaeologists on their butts is kind of hilarious. But I think that's where it's from. I think it's this resentment of people who have gone to school for a very long time and have worked really hard. That, what, maybe they're not that smart. Maybe somebody without all those fancy diplomas can outsmart them, can find the truth where those guys are too hidebound to do it.
Yeah, this idea that Graham has created for what an archaeologist is all phony, though, right? So it's this idea that archaeologists are, some of us went to school for a long time. Most archaeologists have some formal education, although lots don't. Some amazing avocational archaeologists and archaeologists who have learned in the field and in the lab just by volunteering and just getting involved in other ways, and community archaeologists. So you don't necessarily have to go to school for a long time to do it. But even those who do, as listeners to this program will know, because I know it's something Sarah's talked about on the show a lot and had people on to talk about, the mass majority of archaeologists in this country and in most places in the world are working class people who work for an industry. Right? In the United States, we call it cultural resource management. Most people working in CRM are not particularly well paid, do not have great benefits. These are hard jobs. People work really hard, and they do it because they love what they do, and they make a lot of sacrifices for that. And these are not folks who are sitting in their ivory tower in Oxbridge, telling us all what we need to believe. Mass majority of archaeologists do not live a life like that in any way, and so I think I like what Kenny's saying, that the Graham Hancock being the symbol of the everyman is pretty funny when you contrast him with what most archaeologists' lives are actually like.
Well, no kidding, right? But back in the 1960s, Robert Walkup, who was an archaeologist, I think at the University of Texas, wrote a book called Lost Tribes and Sunken Continents. And in that book, he created the kind of the foil that people produce as the symbol of archaeology, and it's Dr. Fuddy-Duddy, and of course he's a guy with long hair and glasses, and he always wears his cap and gown, and he's lecturing. And of course, Walkup was saying that this is what many people believe represents archaeology. Ivory towers, scientists with a lot of training, very little practical knowledge, and they wear a cap and gown like when they take a shower. Dr. Fuddy-Duddy, and that's, man, I tell you what, I know Bill a little bit. I know Kevin McBride. I know a lot of folks in archaeology in Connecticut, and hell, none of us come anywhere near to that stereotype.
I do wear a monocle sometimes, just for fun.
Well,
to do in your personal life.
Hey, whoa! We're getting into archaeology after hours. This always seems to happen when I'm on the show, Sarah.
Hey, there's something else I want to bring up, because it's very important in the Hancock argument, and that is, by its very nature, the fact that this ancient civilization was utterly, he likes using adjectives or adverbs, an adverb, it was an adverb, utterly destroyed by this cataclysm, by this apocalypse. You would not expect to find any evidence, which is, I think that this is kind of a key fundamental flaw in his argument that actually removes it from science and puts it in religion or belief or something else. So, I mean, imagine that, saying, this is my hypothesis. It cannot be tested by the very nature of the hypothesis. Well, that's, Bill was talking about how we test hypotheses. If you can't test the hypothesis because, well, there won't be any evidence. In fact, the lack of evidence is evidence that it existed. You scratch your head and you go, well, you can't be doing science.
Well, he in the first, it's in the first sentence of the show. is he says, well, I'm not an archaeologist, I'm a journalist. And it's amazing how much that's been really resonant. As Sarah alluded to in the beginning, Kenny and I and a number of other archaeologists have been pretty vocal about this and being skeptical. And so we're hearing from a lot of Hancock's fans, and that's one I hear a lot is, well, he's a journalist, he's not an archaeologist, he shouldn't be expected to do science. Well, isn't the rule? He's a journalist. Isn't the first rule of being a journalist that you're supposed to seek the truth and seek honesty and seek?
You also have to support your claims with evidence.
You do, right? Yeah. I don't.
At least you used to. I don't know.
I don't.
Still.
I guess I apologize for this, but when I hear that argument, I'm not an archaeologist, I'm a journalist. I really get the vibe. Well, I'm not a doctor, but I play one on TV. Well, all right. So we should be taking your advice.
I mean, I think some of the interesting things about this is, one, he alludes to this great civilization over and over and over again, but never really tells us anything about it, other than that it was highly advanced, right? We don't know anything about these people that he's purporting to have existed.
Well,
it's very unsatisfying.
Here's the deal. One of the things that he doesn't do, as far as I know, in Ancient Apocalypse, is what he talks about in his most recent book, which is what, America Before, because he gets a little, first of all, the native people of the Americas are the direct descendants and inheritors of this spectacular civilization, and they were able to build stuff using psychic power. So it gets considerably more woo in his most recent book, where he really does talk about this use of paranormal powers that apparently the rest of us have lost in order to build things like Monk's Mound or whatever. So it's like, oh, okay then. So it's getting. I think that it was probably a conscious decision not to really talk about that in the Netflix special, but that's what he's talking about now.
Yeah, I'm wondering if maybe you just spoiled season 2.
I don't know. I don't think so, because that's a thing I've found very interesting is a lot. He's much more careful about his language in this show than he is anywhere else. So because his books, and he sounds a lot less spiritual. Yeah, some of the things I've heard of Hancock that I think are reasonable is he wants to make a spiritual argument. He wants to make an argument that we have a shared spiritual deep past as humans. And you know what? Again, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with approaching a study of antiquity and the human past through a spiritual lens. But he wants to use the veneer of science and I think the sort of anti-elitist language of this show to sell his work a little bit more completely. And so he's very careful about his language in this. But going back to Sarah, you were asking before, like, what evidence does he give? Now, we already talked about how there is no direct evidence for Atlantis, right? We've never found it, and Graham doesn't pretend to have found it. So what he tends to do on the show, which is quite clever, I think, is he works backwards. He starts with the evidence we do have for the societies he believes came from Atlantis, and he goes through and he looks for their commonalities. And anywhere he finds a commonality, a mastery of the stars, an interest in water, a rare and unusual thing for humans to be interested in, or the emergence of agriculture, or monumental great works made of stone. Any of these commonalities that appear in multiple ancient societies must therefore be evidence for Atlantis. Those are the things that came from Atlantis because they're commonalities. And again, that's a circular argument, right? It's unscientific at its very face because it's working the wrong direction. And so that's I think how he does it. I think that's what he's trying to propose, is that if you find something that shows up in society A, B, and C, it must thus come from society D, Atlantis, above that, sort of feeding into this.
But that brings up something that Sarah talked about, this whole notion that, these folks are not understanding the thousands of years that separate some of these sites. That's why Hancock has to, in every one of these cases, embrace fringe hypothesis that these sites are much, much older than archaeologists commonly believe. So it's why Tiwanaku, which we know is a couple of thousand years old, it's got to be 18,000 years old or 15,000 years old, because that fits better with his notion of, this ancient civilization spread its knowledge across the face of the earth more or less at the same time. It's why he makes that Maltese archaeologists in Malta could say, no, we have a really good handle on how old this site is. He's got to deny that. He's got to disclaim that. He's got to make it much older. And that's very common in what he does, because that way he gets rid of the problem of, well, but how do they teach them to build pyramids 5,000 years ago here and 3,000 years ago here, and they've been gone for 5,000 years anyway? He says, well, no, the Sphinx is much older, the pyramids are much older, these sites are much older, Serpent Mound is much older than archaeologists commonly accept. And that again, you're right. You're exactly right, Bill. It's this circular argument. I know how old that site would have to be to support my hypothesis, so I'm going to say it's that old. And well, how do you know it's that old? Well, because it fits my hypothesis.
Yeah.
I think another important question is, just going back to the general hypothesis, is, you've got this super advanced society, right? And all these other simpler people around the globe living their hunter-gatherer lifestyles. And then there's this horrible catastrophe. And how is it that these simple hunter-gatherer societies that have no knowledge and no experience survive this catastrophe, but this super advanced society is the one that's just completely obliterated without a trace?
When you understand, Sarah, when the comet or asteroid hit, there was Donnelly talks about Atlantis being a series of concentric rings. So the asteroid thought that was a bullseye, so it landed directly on Atlantis. So of course they were the ones who were wiped out. Everybody else just watched and said, "Ooh, pretty."
I had an interesting conversation with somebody a couple of weeks ago, and this person had really gone into the evidence on one of the big arguments from Hancock about this cataclysm is that it's not so much that the meteor struck the civilization directly, but that it caused really fast ocean rises. So sort of like what we're seeing now with global warming, but in hyper super massive extra super speed. And this person had sort of run the numbers on this and said, what the evidence shows is that, at the end of the Pleistocene, the beginning of the Holocene, it was a warming period, and sea levels were rising, and even evidence from the YDIH, the Younger Dryas Impact Hypothesis crowd, would suggest that sea levels are rising quite quickly at around maybe 1 millimeter to 1 centimeter a year. So, okay, that is really fast. That's
geologic time.
Geologic time. This is, again, going back to that time dilation thing, right? That is an alarming rate. That is a cataclysmic rate. But it's not so alarming in the sense that you're watching it happen and going, it's not I don't know, what's those old disaster movies with the gigantic tidal wave crushing New York City.
If your advanced society can't move back 0.5 millimeter a year, you're probably not that advanced to start with.
You got that right. At some point, if they're really advanced, they must have looked at that shoreline and said, "Oh, damn, we better relocate because we're going to get to higher ground." But apparently all the other cultures were able to figure that out.
That's because they were hunter-gatherers. They knew how to move. Those folks were mobile, and they knew they could get out of the way. Where
tied to their concentric circles.
Those stubborn Atlanteans just sat there and watched for hundreds of years.
That's also the thing that gets me is how, this catastrophe was so great, it completely, utterly wiped out any evidence of this civilization. And I'm saying the dinosaurs would like to have a word. They were wiped out if the Younger Dryas impact actually happened. The KT boundary shows a much larger cataclysmic apocalypse, and we know there were dinosaurs because we find their remains. So how is that possible? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
No, and we've got the crater too. So I mean, there's a lot of paleontological and geologic evidence of that catastrophe. It seems, although if the asteroid, I think one aspect of the theory was that maybe the asteroid hit the glacier.
Yeah.
So all the evidence of the impact just melted away.
Or it might have been a mini burst in the atmosphere is another theory, I think. I don't think that is in the show, but that's another thing I've heard, that the asteroid actually exploded in the atmosphere, which might have, I don't know. So again, the Younger Dryas, we haven't talked a lot about the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. That's really getting into the weeds a bit, but this is I would call it an unproven hypothesis. But again, a hypothesis, an interesting one to test. And there's actually
and there's the thing too, is to remember, even if the Younger Dryas impact occurred, that has absolutely zero relevance when we talk about, was there an ancient highly sophisticated civilization. That stands or falls on its own. So, impact or not, where's the evidence for a highly sophisticated civilization that was destroyed, but certainly left the archaeological record? I mean, telling archaeologists, well, there won't be any evidence for that, is like, it's like throwing meat at us. And are you kidding? That's what we do. That's the gold standard when we do archaeology. It's the raison d'etre of archaeology is we find physical remains. And if you're telling us, well, but there are none, I don't know. I feel like just kind of say, oh, have a nice life and walk it away.
Yeah, I mean, really, the take home here is like the evidence is that there is no evidence.
Yeah.
So
and
far,
that's
well,
pretty hard to stomach, but
pretty hard to imagine there will be evidence at any point soon. I mean, quite honestly,
people have been looking for 150 years, so I don't know. We'll see.
Well, you know what I have heard some of his supporters say. Well, it's because you archaeologists just haven't looked in the right place. You don't dig deeply enough. I just, oh my God, archaeologists are working on 3 million-year-old sites in Africa. How deep do you want us to go? Paleontologists, oil geologists, hydrologists, sedimentologists, they're all digging way deep. And I tell you what, every paleontologist I know, if they found an ancient city while they were looking for dinosaurs, they would let people know about that.
They'd probably call their archaeology friends, Supposedly we hate each other, paleontologists and archaeologists, but that's just a myth, too. We actually like each other just fine.
We get along fine.
We get along
absolutely, fine. Absolutely. But we don't dig up dinosaurs, please.
No.
Dear God.
Not on purpose.
Not on purpose.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, there you go.
So I guess another thing that we can kind of touch into, especially because Bill's had such an interesting experience, like delving into the debate about this, right, is like we know that these theories appeal to people, but why are they so attached to them? Like, why is it such an emotional issue, that this is true and archaeologists are the bad guys here. They're out to like basically ruin it for everybody.
I think Kenny was on to a lot of it before. There's a populist feel to it. There's an anti-elitist feel to it, right? There's a feeling that archaeologists are a part of some class of intellectual, high-minded, losers who are just out here to sort of keep hidden knowledge from people. And, people have been told this for a long time by a lot of different sources, and even particularly, related to Hancock's been writing about this for decades, as Kenny was mentioning before, but you've also got your television shows, your Ancient Aliens, and on that have been putting this idea out there into the public consciousness for generations at this point in some cases, and that's coming home to roost, I think, and we're finding that. And so, you were mentioning it. I made some videos on my YouTube channel about this, and they got a lot of views. And oh boy, I have gotten a lot of comments on those videos, and some of them are really weird, really confusing, and ideas coming out of every angle you could imagine in there. And I don't pretend to have an answer to this question of why people feel so emotionally attached to these ideas, but it's an important one because there is a lot of research that's been done that shows that this can lead to dangerous places, in that there is a pipeline from these mild conspiratorial spaces that can lead to much more dangerous conspiratorial spaces. And you have folks who do take that pipeline from a Ancient Aliens into a QAnon. Like those two things can be. There's a pipeline between them, and YouTube and the algorithms of places like YouTube and TikTok do not help. They push people into increasingly condensed, intense versions of the things that they like to watch, and so you can find yourself pushed into some quite extreme content very quickly if you show an interest in these sorts of things. So I think that's why we feel like this is a serious thing to talk about. Yeah,
and I think that like many topics in archaeology, we live in our little world of data and hypotheses and all of that, but there's a political aspect to much of archaeology, right? It can rarely be extracted from that. And I think in this case, shows like this, as we mentioned earlier, are about making money. So I think that the timing of this is not coincidental, right? It's capitalizing on like a cultural trend right now that's denying experts and the value of science. All that stuff is like very hot right now, I guess, for lack of a better word.
If your worldview is, well, there's them, and those are the elites, and there's us, then everything that them says, you got to be suspicious of, right? You know, they're trying to pull a fast one on us. They're trying to control us. They want to take away our guns. They want to take away our freedom of speech. And so that everything that comes from the group that they consider to be elite, there's some hidden agenda there. There's some reason they don't want us to know there were giant skeletons in North America. There's some reason they don't want to know that the Sphinx is far older than Egyptologists say. There's some reason why they don't want us to believe in UFOs. So I don't know. I'm not even sure that for all of them their rationale is consistent or the same, but they just know we're out to get them. And this is one of the ways, because we are part of that, because we are educated, because we're at universities, or many of us are, that we are part of that overall conspiracy to control them, to take away their freedoms. And I know I'm starting to sound paranoid myself, but you know, as the old saying goes, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you.
So then the question, I guess, becomes, what can archaeology and archaeologists do to maybe cool this, to maybe get people to understand the real science behind it, and, you know, to revalidate the scientific analysis that Graham kind of goes off and doesn't do?
This is
we can do radio shows like this.
Yeah.
That really is part of the solution.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just going to say, I think some of the most fruitful conversations that have come out of this have been sort of meta conversations, if you will, about how do we address, because this has been one of the most high-profile examples of this sort of thing, although certainly it was not the first. How do we as a community, as archaeologists, react to this? And I've seen every form of opinion. Oh, we shouldn't react at all. We should ignore it. We should hope it's just going to go away. I personally don't think that's the smart approach, but there's also a reaction that I feel sometimes too, that it's to get angry and to fight as hard as you can, and to point out how stupid some of these ideas are, and really yell at people. And I'm not sure that's borne out to be the best approach either. But some of that passion and emotion has to come through, because if you just sort of fit into the mold of, well, I'm going to come and lecture to you now about the truth, you're not really, people are not going to take you seriously.
It's boring.
Yeah, it's boring. One, it's boring, and two, I think it feeds into the narrative a little bit. You can sound exactly like the thing that Graham says that we are. But I think some really creative people and ideas have come out of this in the last few months, with ways that we can speak back to this, provide information, provide the alternative, let people see who archaeologists are, what we're actually like, how we actually feel about these things, and reach them in every form of media, social media, shows like this, places like YouTube and TikTok, blogs, editorials, wherever, because which is a new thing, right? We're seeing more and more, I think, archaeologists speak in these spaces where they weren't previously, and hopefully that will make a difference too. So,
yeah. Like here's my insight, right? Having been doing this for a long time, and my insight is this: the vast majority of people out there find archaeology fascinating. Well, that's really interesting stuff. Egypt, the pyramids, Stonehenge, Mesoamerica, Native American stuff, arrowheads. It's really fascinating. And they want to know more. They do. But only a very small percentage overall become true believers in von Däniken or Graham Hancock. Listen, folks, we're never going to reach them. We really aren't. They are not they're not looking for a dialogue. They're not looking for any insights that we might have. They have staked out their position, and they will defend that position forever. At the same time, there's a very small percentage of people who hear about Graham Hancock, read Eric von Däniken, and immediately say, well, that's a crock. Absolutely not. The vast majority of people, I've done surveys, vast majority of our students anyway, basically say, hey, that's kind of interesting. I wonder what there is whether there's any evidence for that. That sounds, or they watch a show that's very well produced and go, wow, that sounds kind of convincing. We ignore that at our peril because we can't allow there to be a vacuum on our side, right? On say, hey, look, that was an interesting show. Here's why we don't think it works out so well. It's why I've written books. It's why I do podcasts. It's why I'm doing this radio show. It's like, it's not for the true believers. You're not going to change them. I mean, maybe once in a while you will, but generally speaking, you can't focus on them. I will not. I could say some words here that would shut down the radio station, so I won't. But I get emails from people, and I can tell from the subject line whether it's even worth my time to respond to them. Because the things that I've been called in that subject line, and I have a potty mouth, it's like, oh my God, does your mother know you say those things? But those people aren't looking for a dialogue. They're looking to vent. They're looking to claim that you're part of the conspiracy. Don't worry about them. You're not going to change them. But it's all these other people who just look at a show like Ancient Apocalypse or Ancient Aliens, and you know what? They go, that's interesting. What's the deal? And our job is not to belittle them, not to make fun of anybody, but to say, that's a really interesting hypothesis. But here's where it comes from. Here's what's wrong with it. But look at these interesting things that archaeologists are actually discovering. And you know what? I actually get responses from people saying, I didn't know you guys knew that much about that topic. But it takes reading a book. It takes more than watching a TV show. But those are the people who we can move, and I think need to move.
Yeah, and I think that, for all the angry comments and hate mail that Bill got, but having done doing research for this show and looking at a lot of archaeologists' Twitter feeds and other blog posts and things like that where people are laying out the reasons why this show is inaccurate and incorrect and not supported. There were also a lot of positive comments where people were like, thank you for this measured approach. Thank you for explaining this. I was curious. I wondered. So I think that there's definitely the option for reaching people. And I think that kind of leads to one other thing that we can talk about really quickly before we're done is, so next fall in October, there's supposed to be a debate between the archaeologist Flint Dibble and Graham Hancock, hosted by Joe Rogan, which is an interesting platform, I think, for this debate. And, do we think that we went to a discussion about whether or not I think that's going to be productive, if it's a good way to approach this topic,
But I'd be really interested to know what Bill's opinion is, because I'm all over the map on it. I'm not convinced it's a great idea, but maybe it's the kind of a thing that somebody like Flint, who's very knowledgeable, should be doing. I really don't know. What do you think, Bill?
So this is a little bit of context for this is that Joe Rogan and Graham Hancock are old buddies. They've been friends for a long time, and Joe Rogan has claimed out loud that he's a huge fan of Graham Hancock's work. He is one of the true believers that Kenny was talking about before. And they presented this idea that they were going to have a debate with an archaeologist. They really, really wanted to have a debate with this one particular archaeologist who was not interested in doing it. It became a whole hoopla on social media, and eventually...
that was a good choice of words.
If anybody wants to try and chase that down and figure out who I'm talking about, pun intended. Puns are always intended. And so Flint Dibble, who is a younger archaeologist, about my age, he volunteered to do this debate, and I've gotten to know Flint pretty well in the last year or two. I do think he's got a clear head about this. He understands what he's going into, and he does recognize that this is not going to be an even playing field because the moderator of the so-called debate is a guy who's already a huge fan of one of the two people who are debating. But his feeling is, this is too good of a platform to miss, right? Joe Rogan is the most popular podcast literally in the world, has millions of listeners. What better place to be able to get out there and just say exactly like what Kenny was talking before, sort of that counterpoint of, hey, look, here's real archaeology. I already know you think this is cool. Come over and hang out with us and learn about the real stuff. And so unsatisfyingly, I similarly do not have do not feel. I think this is a gray area. I think there's ways in which we could view this and say, going on Joe Rogan is always a mistake. You are platforming, bad ideas there. But you could also make the argument that Flint is making, that this is too big of a platform to miss, and it's too big of an opportunity to be able to make a statement. So. That's both of us giving you really a Weasley answer, Sarah.
Kind of lame.
You sound as uncomfortable as I feel about. I have the pit of my stomach. Just the idea of it, it's very stressful.
But you know what? I think, like we were just talking before, right? There's people on both ends of the spectrum that are already decided. You're not going to move them. But
That's
those people in the middle, they're watching Joe Rogan, and they're going to hear one side if they don't get to hear the other side. I always had a theory when, I worked in regards to speaking with the media. It was never fun, but if I didn't talk to them, they were going to print something, and it was certainly at that point going to be without any input from what I had.
Yeah, and I think just in closing on the Joe Rogan issue, he really is the most popular podcaster in the world, and his audience is certainly not monolithic. So there may be, an audience there that's worth reaching out to. I mean, it might draw a different audience too for this particular event. So we're closing out. We only have just a couple minutes. This went by really quickly.
It did.
Thanks everybody for a fantastic conversation. I guess we usually close out by kind of just telling everybody how they can reach out to you. I suppose you're just going to give people my information tonight. You want me to just...
Sarah.Sportman.
Sarah Sportman. Any complaints? She encouraged us to do this also. I would never have participated in this. I love the show. That Ancient Apocalypse. It's a great show.
No, I guess I'll just say, first of all, I'm really thankful for being here and getting asked to do this with the great eminent sage, the true Atlantean sage, Ken Fader, I don't know how lucky you all are. This is the original voice on these topics, guys. It's pretty cool to have Kenny on here. But if you want to find me, you can find me on YouTube at ArchaeologyTube. I changed the name of the channel since last time I was on, and it turned out that was a good move. So you can find me there, or on Twitter at ArchaeologyGame. Either one of those is good ways to get a hold of me. But
you can always go ahead, Kenny.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't want to talk to anybody. If you knock on my door, I'm going to have the shades down, and I'll pretend I'm not home. But otherwise, I'm on Twitter. I'm on the Facebook thing now. Is that a new thing, that Facebook?
Yeah.
Because I just signed up for it. It's pretty cool. And I won't tell you about the time when I was an undergraduate that me and my buddies got naked, wrapped ourselves in sheets, got our guitars, and walked across campus at 2 a.m. singing the Donovan song about Atlantis, way down below the ocean where I want to be, she may be. We actually did that, thankfully. I mean, I hope to God there's not like some recording of that, but I own up to it now. But hey, look, we're the reason that Bill does archaeology, the reason I do archaeology, the reason everybody I know who does archaeology does it, is we feel passionately about this stuff. We're really interested in it, and we're proselytizers. We like telling people about the things we do. And when somebody comes along and says, it's all wrong, we say, yeah, maybe we get our backs up, and maybe we get a little pissed off. But we really do want to talk about the real deal, the real archaeology, and encourage you to take classes, and encourage you to buy books, and encourage you to go visit archaeological sites that are open to the public. That's my big thing now with national parks and national monuments. Go see this stuff for yourself, and you'll come away with, I think, a real appreciation for the creativity and the imagination and the genius of past people who didn't need help from the Peace Corps, from outer space or whatever, just to accomplish what we know they accomplished.
And as we wind up, I don't think it could have been said any better, Kenny. Thanks for taking us to break.
Ta-da.
Bye.